I was waiting for someone to put together a reel of like someone holding a gun to the head of David Littleproud in the background, but hasn't come out yet. So we're just stuck with the actual video, which is bad on its own. Man who is convicted as a murderer identifies himself as a female and is now being outed as having sexually assaulted women in a female prison. A stillbirth is quite obviously not a planned, chosen, and wanted abortion. A man is quite obviously not a woman. And the longer that we continue to pretend as though and tiptoe around the fact that that is an insane statement to say that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, the longer we are going to go into the slow decline that pretty much every major empire and civilization has seen across history. G'day, welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the greatest hostage video of all time as the coalition gets back together. We'll take a quick look into Isaac Herzog's speech today outside of Bondi. The world is still spinning and it's still not a genocide. And finally, we'll take a look at a man in a woman's prison. He's a murderer. There was a sexual assault. Are we surprised? All that and more on the Mark Pirotta Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blaster! Welcome to the Mark Pirotta Show.
Before we get into our main stories for today, we'll just jump through a couple of really interesting stories. So it was broken by the Sunday Telegraph earlier this week that the teachers group called Teachers for Palestine have been outside of the curriculum sharing, teaching and creating pro-Palestine material that is being taught to children in schools. This material includes images that have been created of the Powerpuff Girls and Bluey wearing, flying, and using symbols of the Palestinian movement. Now, if it wasn't already clear enough that our public education system and our public funded education system, all the way up through to tertiary education, that is universities, is entirely just one big indoctrination center, then this is just proof in the pudding. We aren't speaking in hypotheticals anymore. The evidence is coming out. Now, it's very easy for people to say that in universities, a lecturer can teach whatever they want. But at the end of the day, our public education system has a curriculum for a reason. There is a set way that we teach things because there is a right and a wrong. There is a true and a false. And despite all of the pandering of the pro-Palestine movement, the facts on the ground have not changed. Israel did not commit a genocide, has not committed a genocide, and is still not committing a genocide in Gaza. By every available report, more babies have been born in Palestine than civilians have been killed over the course of the last 2 years. We watched what is really a genocide happen in Iran, and the pro-Palestine crowd was pretty much silent. New reports are showing that 30,000 plus people were killed in Iran protesting the regime under Ayatollah Khomeini. The same Ayatollah Khomeini whose image was borne on the shoulders, in the hands, and behind the politicians who run our government as they walked over the Harbour Bridge in last year's protest. The images that we are seeing coming out of these schools and the reporting that is coming out is nothing short of heinous and a distinct degradation of the way that we teach our children. In further news, the Antisemitism Royal Commission has now been expanded to include hatred against Aboriginals and racism against Aboriginals. This reporting is problematic to say the least. Now, a Royal Commission is meant to have very, very strict defined boundaries. It's meant to have rules around what it can actually look at, how it can look at it, what the results are meant to show to an extent. Now, this Royal Commission, being one of the first that has ever been time restricted, is already going to have issues when it comes to providing evidence simply based around anti-Semitism. Giving it an 11-month timeline is problematic because if they need more time, they don't have it. They have to report by the 14th of December, I believe it is, which only gives them 11 months to look into the anti-Semitism portion. Now, I'm not saying that it is not important to look at Aboriginal hatred within this country. I mean, it is something that goes both ways. And if anything, the hatred comes more from the Aboriginals to the non-Indigenous Australians than it goes the other way around. But at the end of the day, if there is hatred to be investigated, then it ought to be investigated. And hatred is not the undefined term. It is real acts of racism that are occurring within our streets, in our institutions, that may exist as a fabric that underpins our society. Now, I, for one, have never actually experienced that in any way, shape, or form, at least not in the physical respect. Kangaroo Jack, who is someone who I've brought up on this show before, just went earlier this week, I believe it was over the weekend actually, over to a One Nation barbecue. He went to a One Nation barbecue and sat for hours with these people and just had a discussion about how he feels about the country, how he sees the country moving forwards. He stated that he won't be voting for One Nation, but at the same time said he enjoyed the yarn. And so if we start expanding out royal commissions that already have time-restricted deadlines, how are we going to be able to trust the information that comes out of them? In other reporting, Joanna Howe is now indicating an even more scrupulous and problematic issue that is coming out of Queensland. Now, this is something that I did not know about. I only found out about it because Joanna brought it to the limelight over the course of the weekend. It turns out that David Crisafulli, over in Queensland, barred discussions about abortion from happening inside of the Queensland government. That, to me, is a distinct problem when it comes to the way that we govern. How is it possible for us to believe that we live in a democracy where a conversation simply cannot happen and can be stifled by a government in power? That is not democracy. That is dictatorship. There is no two ways about that. Go look up Joanna Howe's page today and go look at the reporting she's been doing. She's really taking it to the people of Queensland, to the government of Queensland. I do suggest that you, by the time this episode comes out, go and look at the images that will likely be out around the protest that is happening in front of Queensland government on the Monday night. See what comes out of it, see who you can share the story with, and get this to spread. I've been using the hashtag BabySamuel quite a bit over the last few days. That was the story that we shared in our last episode, which aired on Friday. And it's terrifying. It is terrifying that the largest cause of death in Australians today, single cause of death, is abortion. In saying that, let's move on to our main stories for today. Unfortunately, making these sorts of little please do's is kind of essential. I enjoy doing it just for the fun of it, but at the same time, if you want to get a message out, you need the people in your community to just comment, like, subscribe, all of the normal jargon, right? Please just take a moment and give me a hand. We need to create a culture of commentary together. And I love the messages coming in my DMs. Put it in the comments section so that everyone else can see it too. Thank you. Our number one story for today is the coalition is back together. Somehow. Let's take a look at the video that can only be described as a hostage situation. I was waiting for someone to put together a reel of like someone holding a gun to the head of David Littleproud in the background, but hasn't come out yet. So we're just stuck with the actual video, which is bad on its own. Watch.
Afternoon. Today I can announce with David Littleproud that the Liberals and Nationals are back in coalition, acting in the national interest to hold this awful Albanese Labor government to account. We have a task to chart the course back to government. The coalition is the most enduring and successful partnership in Australia's political history, and we have a record of delivering strong and stable government. Now, I acknowledge that this has been a difficult time. It's been a difficult time for millions of our coalition supporters and many other Australians who rely on our two great parties to provide scrutiny and national leadership. But the coalition is back together and looking to the future, not the past. We're squarely focused on representing the Australian people and fighting for their needs, their aspirations and their hopes. They deserve no less, they expect no less, and they will receive no less.
It is terrifying to see a man like that, so belittled, saying nothing, pretending as though he's agreeing with a woman who is spouting the same political rhetoric as pretty much everyone else in government, saying we're going to reduce prices, reduce taxes, reduce this, reduce that. We've come back together. We're all happy and dandy. No one's upset anymore. There's no problems. These people have been throwing mud at each other for the last 4 weeks, effectively since the end of the coalition. All they've done is talk rubbish about each other. They haven't said anything to each other's faces, and now suddenly they're coming together. And there's only one reason why. It's One Nation's rise. One Nation is surging once again. At this point in time, One Nation is polling at about 27%, with the Labor Party only polling at about 33%, which is a 1% drop in their primary vote from the last election. The coalition has dropped into the 17s and 18s, and it looks like it's dropping further. There is no path forward at the moment for the coalition. There seems to be no way forward for either of the two major parties, because the Nationals and the Liberals on one side are sort of shooting themselves in the foot, and the Labor Party keeps making insane mistakes, crazy decisions that are destroying their base, but at the same time they're trying to pretend as though everything is hunky-dory. There is nothing distinct about Labor at this stage. All One Nation has to do right now is effectively just fill seats. Fill seats, campaign, grassroots. That's the main stuff that they've got to do for the next 2 years. If over the course of the next 6 months, we continue to see One Nation either maintain course when it comes to polling or grow slightly, the next election is going to be a blowout. Because it's very likely, with our next story, that we will see Labor lose a large share of their votes. The Greens are radicalising the Labor base. And if things continue the way they're going, they will not preference Labor. And if that does happen, it'll be a seismic shift in the Australian political situation. Now, while we've created that bridge, we might as well move on to our next story. Isaac Herzog landed in Australia. He started off his trip by going to the memorial site over in Bondi, where he gave an impassioned speech, and then took some questions from the journalists who were there. And one specifically, there were two really good questions that he answered, but one answer specifically really struck me. And he really summarised the way that these protests and Australia's role in creating Israel to begin with. Watch.
President Herzog, thank you for your visit. You've had the chance to meet with families and victims today for the first time. Many of them have spoke about their frustrations about the lead up to this attack. Do you share those frustrations? Could more have been done to prevent such an attack on the Jewish community?
These frustrations were shared by many of us, including myself, where I alerted as I've seen this wave surge all over the world, and I've seen it in many countries, including Canada, Great Britain, the United States, and Australia, all English-speaking countries. And I've alerted way in advance, as well as many others, and that is why I understand this frustration clearly. And I hope the steps that were recently taken will bring change. This has to be a consistent, ongoing effort to change reality.
President Herzog, standing here at this solemn site where 15 people were killed indiscriminately, there are protests planned today in Sydney for people who are mourning 70,000 killed in Gaza, including 20,000 children. Can you reflect on what is the message to protesters, if you have one?
Sure. First of all, it is important for me to say that I've come here in goodwill and in a message to the people of Australia. Australia and Israel are close friends and allies since the days of old. It was Australian soldiers who liberated the Holy Land as one of the greatest steps towards the creation of the homeland of the Jewish people. And it was Australia who was the first nation to declare and recognize Israel at the United Nations. And Australia is a close ally for years. And Israel was always a bipartisan issue in Australia. These demonstrations, in most cases, what you hear and see, comes to undermine and delegitimize our right, my nation's right, the nation which I am the head of state of its mere existence, and is contradictory to whatever ever was said and done by Australia. And we did not seek that war. On October 7th, our nation was attacked terribly, and people were butchered, murdered, raped, and burnt and abducted. We have here bereaved Israeli families who came from the kibbutz Nir Oz, and came from the war in order to express their condolences here at Bondi, but also to make a clear statement and a message. We should all fight terror together. Terror is what undermines the whole availability of peace and the notion of peace in our region. As always, it was always the case and is always the case. And therefore, terror is unacceptable by any means.
It is an interesting distinction that very few people actually realize. Why is it that Britain had control of the land that is now Israel? The name of it being called British Mandate Palestine at the time of the end of World War II, before it was carved up and portions of it were given to Israel. Why is it that Britain actually held that? Now, we often talk about Gallipoli, and we memorialise it every year, we speak about our Anzacs, but what people fail to realise is that the Palestinians weren't just these innocent farmers who just existed for thousands of years with no issues. The land that was Palestine and the people within Palestine were part of the flailing Ottoman Empire in World War I. The Ottoman Empire that allied itself with Germany as one of the Axis powers during the First World War. Britain, with the help of the Australians, actually liberated that area from the Ottomans during the war and destroyed the southeastern front of the German assault on the Allied forces. It is a difficult distinction to make in today's world because we do not speak of it as Palestinians. We always speak about them as the Ottoman empires or the Turks, but that land was effectively entirely controlled by what was the most brutal regime ever. The Ottoman Empire was a regime that did slavery 10, 20, 30 times worse than the transatlantic slave trade ever did it. Their brutality was unmatched. The only army that ever matched the Ottoman Empire in its war crimes was the Huns. There is no comparison. And so when Isaac Herzog speaks about the role that Australia played in creating what is now Israel, he is speaking about that very first conflict in World War I, where Australia as a nation, only being about 15 years old at the time as its own independent country, no longer a colony, actually played in liberating that area from what was then Islamic Ottoman rule. And so Britain, after carving it up, Australia was one of the first nations that actually signed on to Israel and the ICJ, which is the International Court of Justice, and actually created the nation of Israel with its vote, or at least played a part in doing so. And he points out the hypocrisy that now exists in Australian government, that for so long we have been bipartisan on the issue, but in order to placate those who would use data that is so false in order to label people as genocidal, as war criminals, without ever having been through a court of law, which is a decimation of the Western legal system, we end up with what we have today. 2 years of protests, and now possibly $5 million spent on police officers, snipers, and the like in order to ensure the safety of an Israeli president who Australians past have voted in order for them to have independence after the Holocaust. And no one is a greater example of this hypocrisy and the degeneration of the Australian political class than Mehreen Faruqi. Her words are a testament to everything that is wrong with our country today. It is legality through opinion. It is degeneration of the legal system through made-up words and made-up accusations that cannot be proven, but which pull at the heartstrings instead of being able to be proven in a court of law. Watch.
Isaac Herzog should be arrested and investigated the minute he steps foot in this country for the crime of inciting genocide. It is disgraceful that we are welcoming war criminals into this country. Labour governments may launch an assault on our right to protest, but we are not going to give in or give up our basic democratic and human rights to protest against a genocide. The Albanese Labour government has completely now given up even pretense to caring international law or our obligations under the Genocide Convention. We have heard from many legal experts who say that the special immunity to Isaac Herzog does not apply for the head of the state, which is committing a genocide, which is committing war atrocities, which is committing war crimes. So it is absolutely valid for us to stand there and say that he should be investigated and he should be arrested. I mean, the Prime Minister still has time to rescind his invitation to President Herzog. He still has time to admit that he made a terrible and appalling mistake and show that the Labour government has some semblance of morality left in them.
She is one of the most difficult people to watch in Australian politics. Not only because it's quite difficult to actually understand her most of the time because the way she strings sentences together makes almost no sense, but also because she just throws out a million accusations and pretends as though they're facts. She calls him a war criminal. He's never been convicted of being a war criminal. She calls the nation of Israel genocidal, even though Israel has never been convicted of a genocide. They have been called by the UN, which is not a legal court. They've been accused of potentially enabling a genocide. But from every single statistic, as we said earlier in the episode, it seems as though genocide never happened. In fact, more babies were born than people were killed. And this is what happens when you allow the degradation of your political class to allow just anyone to be elected. And it's a question that I've had for a long time. How is it that the greatest court that we have, the court that actually passes legislation in this country that affects everyone, not just individual rulings in a court of law, not just you're guilty or you're innocent, but the legislation that dictates whether you may or may not be guilty or innocent based upon the whims of the Senate on any given day. How is it that just anyone can effectively be elected into the Senate? You don't have to have a background in law. You don't have to have any understanding of the way that the legal system in Australia actually works. You don't have to even have a respect for the current system. You could just want to tear the whole thing down. And somehow you're allowed to be elected into the Senate of this country. That isn't progress in any way, shape, or form. It's not even really representation because the way the Senate works is that you can be elected with effectively a 4% primary. And so something definitely needs to change if we are going to ensure that our country can stop its slow decline into madness and move forward as a country as we did from our inception up until about the 1980s. Something will have to give. Otherwise, we're going to end up with more stories like this one, where a man who is convicted as a murderer identifies himself as a female and is now being outed as having sexually assaulted women in a female prison. Now, this story was quashed for the better part of 2 years because the victim was given a payout. But it is again evidence of everything that we have been saying as a conservative movement for the better part of 5 to 10 years. You are not a woman simply because you say that you are. Moreover, you ought to be even more guilty if you pretend that you are, because you are attempting to victimize women again. Men have no place in women's spaces. That is not a controversial statement. That is fact. You are enticing men to do something that is now a legal part of almost every state in the country. For $70 tomorrow, I could go to Service New South Wales and change my gender legally. It would be illegal to discriminate against me in any form as an identified woman. If I was to go for a female scholarship, if I was to go for a female sports team, or even to say that I would go to a female prison. It would be illegal to discriminate against me in that way because it would fall under the same sex discrimination laws that everyone currently thrives under today. It's the same sort of thing that we spoke about when we were speaking to the stillborn definitions, right? Where there are pre-existing laws that exist that give payments for stillbirth. And so to outsource or to expand the definition of stillbirth to also include those that are intentionally born stillbirth through abortion, people are able to claim funds under that. And this is the same thing. If I can define myself as a woman today and claim the benefits of a woman tomorrow, what do the definitions in our legal system even mean? Where are we heading as a nation if we cannot simply define these terms for what they are? A stillbirth is quite obviously not a planned, chosen, and wanted abortion. A man is quite obviously not a woman. And the longer that we continue to pretend as though and tiptoe around the fact that that is an insane statement to say that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, the longer we are going to go into the slow decline that pretty much every major empire and civilization has seen across history, where sexual delusion takes over progress, where the ideology of the weak, the crazed, and the manic take over those who actually want to ensure the prosperity of the majority and all of its citizens. That will do us for the show today. My name is Mark Pirotta, and this is the Mark Pirotta Show. God bless.